I was 6 months pregnant. Oliver pushed me off the yacht at a birthday party. His childhood sweetheart had fallen overboard. The yacht was too small. It couldn't hold 3 people. I was later rescued from the sea. I was taken to the hospital. I urgently needed my family's signature for surgery. The doctors couldn't get in touch with Oliver. Later, I saw a photo of the two of them holding hands in Sophia's circle of friends. The caption read, "Love in an accident. Thank you for always being there for me all these years." After I was discharged from the hospital, I left a divorce agreement. I decided to let go. Let him be free. The 7th call was still not answered. After the call was automatically disconnected, I calmly told the doctor I'd better sign it myself. I don't want the baby. As soon as I finished speaking, the doctor looked a little hesitant. He asked, "Mrs. Oliver, would you like to reconsider? After all, this baby didn't come easily. Even if you don't want it, you should discuss it with Oliver before making a decision. Can you contact him now, or should I keep waiting for him to call back?" A sneer appeared at the corner of my mouth. The doctor was at a loss for words. He stuttered for a long time without answering. In fact, I knew very well that Oliver was comforting Sophia, who had fallen overboard. He couldn't possibly care about me. Otherwise, while on the yacht, Oliver wouldn't have pushed me so hard into the sea in their circle of friends. The two of them are inseparable. Even I, the original wife, feel a little jealous. Just do as I say, after all. An unloved child will suffer when they are born, that's what they say. But when I was pushed into the operating room, I felt the flesh and blood in my belly slowly fall off. My belly gradually became flat. My hatred for Oliver has reached its limit. I had imagined countless times how happy I would be if I married Oliver. We might have a child or two, a boy like him, a girl like me. He would teach the boy to protect his mother and sister. I would teach the girl to be a good daughter to her father. But reality was like a cold scalpel. It made me unable to even have a child. I actually knew in my heart that Oliver had never really liked me. On the day we got married, his childhood friend, who had just returned from abroad, happened to be there. Oliver, who was usually punctual, was unexpectedly late for the wedding that day. The host kept urging him from the stage with a microphone, but he still didn't show up, until I passed by a private room in the hotel and heard Sophia and Oliver talking. Sophia said, "Brother Oliver, you said you'd wait for me before. Why did you suddenly get married? You didn't keep your promise." "Sophia, I'm really sorry. The person you love is me, not her, I understand, but I had no choice." After that day, I buried everything I heard deep in my heart. Ever since I knew that Oliver didn't love me, I've been even nicer to him over the years. His company was in financial difficulty. I borrowed money from my family to help him tide over the crisis. Due to the pressure of work, he often had stomach aches. I studied traditional Chinese medicine and cooked medicinal food for him. 7 months ago, I found out I was pregnant. Oliver put down a contract worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He flew overnight to be with me. He had dark circles under his eyes. From behind, he took out a bunch of my favorite camellias. At that moment, I felt all the hard work over the years was worth it. I had warmed this man's heart. The operation went well. Take the patient to the ward. Continue to observe. The effects of the anesthesia slowly wore off. The wound on my stomach hurt. It gradually woke me up. His heart had already cooled. He was the one who showed me the side I wanted to see. Oliver didn't call back until the next day. At that time, I was being examined with the help of a nurse. After the examination, I could go home to rest. "Amelia, where are you? Why aren't you at home?" I couldn't help but laugh. He finally remembered me. "What are you laughing at? Why didn't you make breakfast today?" Over the years, Oliver's breakfast has always been my responsibility. His stomach is not very good, and the food outside is not hygienic enough, so every morning I get up early and cook breakfast for him. "Oliver, I'm in the hospital." There was a sudden pause on the other end of the line. I could vaguely hear Sophia say in a pitiful voice, "Brother Oliver, is my sister angry with me because of what happened yesterday? That's why she said she went to the hospital on purpose. It's all my fault. I can't even drive a yacht. If the yacht hadn't capsized," Oliver quickly reassured her. "Don't be silly. She's so healthy. There's no way she'd go to the hospital. She loves the water. She goes swimming in the pool every week. This seawater is nothing to her. She'd love to swim a few more laps." I didn't want to hear any more. My heart was already full of hurt. Overnourished? Why not just say I'm fat, all this flesh? It's all for his child. But he's full of disdain. Before I got pregnant, I always kept fit because I love swimming so much. But now it's so cold in winter, and the sea is freezing. How could I possibly want to swim more laps And Oliver seems to forget. I'm already 6 months pregnant. Ever since I got pregnant, I haven't been swimming or in the water. For the sake of this precious little life, I try to stay in bed every day and not go anywhere, even yesterday's birthday party. I reluctantly attended only after Oliver repeatedly persuaded me. Sophia celebrated her 26th birthday. She was so excited that she wanted to enter a yacht race. Oliver and I formed a team. She chose to sail alone in a boat. Just at the most critical moment, an accident occurred. Sophia's boat capsized. In order to save her, Oliver pushed me off the boat. "Amelia, why are you here?" A familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. Oliver was supporting Sophia as she queued for a checkup. I was fetching the test results. I looked at Oliver calmly. My own husband had ignored me, but accompanied another woman to the hospital for a checkup. I suddenly felt a little ridiculous. "I already told you, I'm at the hospital." Oliver's eyes immediately showed a trace of panic. He hurried over, trying to snatch the test results from me, but I avoided him. In the end, he coughed twice awkwardly. Then he asked me, "Amelia, are you okay?" "It's all my fault. I was in such a hurry yesterday. I was so focused on saving lives. I didn't even notice you getting in the water. I looked for you as soon as I got out of the water. And when I found out you were okay, I took Sophia to the hospital for a checkup." I looked at him deeply. If I wasn't 100% sure that Oliver pushed me into the water, I might have been moved by his heartfelt words. Sophia came to me with sobs. She said, "Sister, I'm sorry. It's all because I wasn't smart enough. Please don't be angry with Brother Oliver anymore. Brother Oliver, please take your sister home. I can do the checkup myself." Hearing this, Oliver, who had planned to take me home, hesitated visibly. I knew very well that if something like this had happened to me in the past, I would have chosen to endure in silence. I backed down. Sophia must have seen that I would react this way. That's why she dared to say those strange things. Now I ignored her completely. I said directly to Oliver, who was still in a daze, "Are you leaving or not?" "If you're not, I'm leaving first." As Oliver and I left together, I saw Sophia's gloomy face reflected in the glass of the hospital. Her expression was not a good one. It was completely different from her usual gentle and pitiful appearance. The test results showed nothing serious. I asked Oliver to drive. We left the hospital. Once we got on the elevated highway, Oliver and I fell silent. I knew he was worried about King May. I was thinking about how to bring up the divorce. After a while, Oliver's phone suddenly rang. Sophia's name kept flashing on the screen. He glanced at me. Seeing that I didn't react, he turned off the Bluetooth and answered the call. The voice on the other end of the line was quite loud. I could vaguely hear Sophia crying. "Oliver, brother." I was scared. The car braked sharply. It skidded more than 10 meters. With a bang, my head hit the window hard. Oliver didn't even care about me. "Sophia, don't worry. Take your time." "What happened?" she said between sobs. I didn't even hear what the doctor said. I only heard that I had to go and have my blood taken. "Brother Oliver, I'm really scared. I'm all alone right now. I'm scared to have my blood taken." She finished speaking. She cried even more. "Can you come with me? I'm really scared." Oliver didn't say anything else. He just looked at me. I rubbed my bruised head. "If I said no and told you not to go, would you not go?" He paused for a moment. Finally, he said this. "Amelia, I'm sorry. She's a little girl alone in the hospital. I really can't rest easy." I gave a small smile. Oliver, was so relieved. Leaving a patient alone on the viaduct, so he could go off to see his childhood sweetheart as a matter of course. "You can go if you want. Leave the car with me. I'll drive it back myself." Oliver froze for a moment. "I can't drive. I'm even scared of driving, because when I was learning to drive, there was a chain reaction on the overpass. The car I was driving was caught in the middle. It almost got squashed. Since then, I've never dared to touch the steering wheel again." Oliver knew about this. Even so, he drove off decisively. "Amelia, stop it. I'll be right back." At some point, it started to drizzle outside. He left me on the overpass. He drove off at full speed, ignoring the rain and wind. In a flash, he disappeared at the end of the road. I was alone in the car. I managed to force a wry smile. "Oliver, it's really over." I took out my phone. I called a designated driver. After the designated driver dropped me off at home, Oliver still hadn't moved. I was at home sorting out my clothes. I packed everything away. His phone call came through. Even over the phone, I could hear him apologizing. He said, "I'm sorry, Amelia. Sophia is not feeling very well. She may have been shocked by the fall into the water last night. I have to stay with her today." I remain silent. There is no response. Oliver's tone becomes softer. "Amelia, don't worry. I will definitely come home to stay with you tomorrow. After hanging up the phone, I freeze for a while before I come to my senses. The house is cold. There is no warmth at all. I can't help but shed tears. I picked up the phone and called home. Mom, I want to come home this weekend. Although my mother didn't know what had happened to me, she knew that home was always my safe haven, she asked. Really? Amelia, when will you be back? I'll ask your father to pick you up. When my father was mentioned, I couldn't help but laugh. He's busy with meetings every day. How could he find time to pick me up? My mother glared at me and said with a huff, I've made it clear. Even if he doesn't have time, he still has to find the time to pick you up. I've always admired my parents' marriage. Maybe because I grew up in a happy family. After I married Oliver, I tried hard to imitate my mother, trying to take care of the family well. But then I realized, Oliver is Oliver, and my father is my father. They are different in the end. I fell asleep in bed. The next day, Oliver woke me up as soon as he got back. He changed his clothes. He said he wanted to keep me company, but all he did was have breakfast with me. He looked very anxious. After a few hurried bites of his buns, he said, Sophia hasn't been in a good mood lately. I'll probably have to keep her company for a while. Oliver looked at me carefully. He was trying to figure out how to convince me. Suddenly, I nodded. It's okay. I understand. You go keep her company. I'll be at home for a few days. I won't go out. Oliver is stunned. He probably didn't expect me to agree so readily. So much so that he doesn't get a chance to say the words he had prepared. In the end, he can only nod awkwardly and hug me tightly. Amelia, you're so good. Don't worry. I'll be back soon. After saying this, he turns and walks away without even looking back. I silently think this was not the first time he had left me. And each time it was because of Sophia. That was why he had left me. Before, I might have felt heartbroken. I might even have fought with him recklessly. But now, I no longer cared about these things, and I no longer felt heartbroken. In the following days, Oliver kept coming back from time to time. The wounds on my body slowly healed. My body also began to recover. One morning, I packed my suitcase with the clothes I had already packed and all my other belongings. I was ready to go. It's a little funny to say. I had been packing for so long, but I realized that I couldn't even fill one suitcase with my clothes. That's when I suddenly realized, after all these years of being married to Oliver, there were really so few things in this house that belonged to me. In the past, I had spent all my energy taking care of Oliver, always hoping that he would respond to me, but I neglected myself. Looking back, it's for the best. Because in this way, it's much easier to erase all traces of my existence. I dragged my suitcase out of the house. On the coffee table in the living room, I left a divorce agreement. Oliver gave me a wedding ring. I've always worn it on my finger. This time, I took it off too and placed it next to the agreement. I left the house. I hailed a taxi and went straight to the airport. I'm walking along the road. I never thought Oliver would suddenly call me, as usual in recent days. He usually only comes home to me when his clothes are dirty. I hesitate for a few seconds. I'm afraid Oliver will find me answering the phone, but I press the answer button anyway. His anxious voice comes over the line. Amelia, the property management said you just left the house. Where are you going? I freeze for a moment. I never thought he would see through me. In the end, I had to make up an excuse. Oh, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to the hospital for a checkup. Oliver's tone immediately eased up. He said with a relaxed tone, judging by the time, it's really time for the checkup. I'll go with you later. After hanging up the phone, I immediately told the driver to speed up and head to the airport. Fortunately, Oliver didn't contact me again until the plane was about to take off. After getting on the plane, I immediately blocked his number on the other side. Oliver appeared at the hospital. He took out his phone and made several calls, but each time, the message said the number was temporarily unavailable. Oliver couldn't get in touch with anyone. He had to go to the doctor and ask, "Is it Amelia? She has no record of a prenatal checkup today, and our medical records show that Emtikes Amelia had an abortion a week ago. The baby is gone." Oliver was stunned for a while. In the end, he couldn't remember how he left the hospital. He sat in the car in a daze. He subconsciously took out his phone. He dialed Amelia's number, but the phone still rang with the same cold tone. It said the number was not available. Oliver was very confused. He kept thinking about what the doctor had just said. The doctor said Miss Amelia had already had an abortion. She had aborted the baby. What a nuisance. Oliver slammed the steering wheel for many years. Ever since the company was slowly getting back on track, he hadn't been this distracted for a long time, but the strange looks Amelia had been giving him these days. and her unusually cold attitude towards him. An answer he didn't dare think about suddenly came to mind, and then the car started up quickly. Oliver's eyes were red. He drove straight towards home. He ignored the traffic lights along the way, just pressing the accelerator to quickly get home. He kept repeating the words in his head. Amelia, you're home. Aren't you? You should be home. Oliver reached the front door. He looked at the dark house. Suddenly, he didn't have the courage to open the door. He lit a cigarette. His eyes were vacant. If it had been any other time, as soon as the smell of smoke had dispersed, Amelia would have appeared immediately. She would have put out the cigarette in his mouth. Oliver silently repeated this in his heart. He lit another cigarette, and another, until the whole pack was gone. Amelia still didn't come. Finally, Oliver mustered up the courage and used the key to unlock the door. He didn't turn on the light. Instead, he shouted Amelia's name. Amelia, where are you? On the way home. Oliver had already made up his mind. No matter what Amelia asked him to do this time, he would agree without hesitation. He shouted a few times, but the house was still quiet. There was no response. A sudden, heavy pain shot through his heart. It felt like something had hit him hard. Just then, the voice of the property manager came from outside the door. The property manager saw Oliver come out dazed. He asked, "Excuse me, is Mr. Oliver inside?" The property manager saw that Mr. Oliver's door was not closed, and the lights in the house were not on. At first, he thought there was a thief. After discovering that it was Mr. Oliver, the property manager let out a sigh of relief. He said, "Since it's Mr. Oliver, then everything is fine." After saying that, the property manager planned to leave. Oliver suddenly remembered that the property manager had called him today to tell him that Amelia had gone out. He immediately went up to ask, "Did my wife go out today? Do you know where she went? She told me she went to the hospital, but I've looked everywhere and haven't seen her. When Miss Amelia left, she was pushing a suitcase. It didn't look like she was going to the hospital. It looked more like she was going on a trip." As for how the property left, Oliver couldn't remember. The image of Amelia pulling her suitcase away had lingered in Oliver's mind. He didn't dare think about why she had left, until a cold wind blew. He came back to his senses. He turned around and stumbled his way home. As soon as Oliver turned on the lights, his gaze was immediately drawn to the few pieces of white paper on the coffee table. What surprised him even more was beside the paper was his wedding ring, which he knew only too well. The shining ring, like a sharp sword, stabbed him in the heart. From the door to the coffee table, just a few steps, but Oliver had taken more than half an hour to get there. On the white A4 paper cover, the words divorce agreement stood out in bold letters. His legs gave way, and he finally collapsed onto the floor, powerless. When he first heard from the property management company, he had held onto a glimmer of hope. But now that hope had vanished completely, he felt his blood run cold. His heart felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand. He could hardly breathe. Suddenly, the sound of a door lock turning could be heard in the room. Oliver immediately looked up. A glimmer of light flashed in his otherwise dull eyes. But when the person appeared and spoke, he lowered his head again. "What is it, Oliver? I called you. You didn't answer. I was a little worried about you." "I'm fine. You can go now." For the first time, Oliver told Sophia to leave. Sophia was taken aback. But instead of leaving, she sensed that Oliver was a little down. So she walked up to him and asked with concern, "Oliver, is something wrong? You don't seem to be in a good mood." His voice was hoarse. He said with a confused look on his face, "Amelia doesn't seem to need me anymore." As soon as Sophia heard this, an expression of excitement immediately appeared on her face. The joy in her eyes could not be hidden. She was about to speak, but Oliver suddenly looked up, staring at her coldly. Sophia froze for a moment. She had not expected Oliver to suddenly ask her, "Amelia doesn't want me anymore. You seem quite happy about that, don't you?" She quickly picked up where Oliver had left off. "Of course I'm happy. Amelia's gone. We can be together in peace. Brother Oliver, you never liked her. She's been pestering you for so long. Now you're finally free," she said, while opening her arms wide. She wanted to hug Oliver. Suddenly, a pair of hands pushed her violently to the ground. Oliver's face was expressionless, but his eyes were cold. He stared straight at Sophia. "Sophia, for so many years, I've only ever thought of you as a sister. How can you replace Amelia and be with me?" He was furious. His face was dark. He grabbed Sophia by the collar and pulled her up from the ground. Sophia begged for mercy, but he ignored her, dragging her step by step out the door, and threw her out. Sophia shouted, "Brother Oliver, are you crazy? It was me you loved. Amelia was just a robber. She stole you away from me all these years." You were always by my side. But have you ever thought about how Amelia feels?" Oliver froze for a moment. Her eyes slowly turned red. At that moment, she seemed to understand Amelia's feelings a little. Just as Sophia had said, he had been spending a lot of time with Sophia recently. He hadn't cared about Amelia for a long time. He had said that he would spend time with her whenever he was free. But in reality, he had only spent one meal with her these days. How did she spend her time at home alone? Oliver didn't dare to think any further. She had been pushed into the sea by him. She had had an operation. She had lost the baby. He had never even asked how she was doing. She must hate him. That night, after Oliver had sent Sophia away, he sat at the coffee table all night. The divorce papers and the wedding ring were on the table. He didn't even dare to look at them. Oliver looked around and realized that there was no trace of Amelia left in the house. She even took the cup she usually used for water. On learning this, Oliver couldn't help but smile wryly. "Amelia, you're really ruthless." He locked himself in his room for a long time. He didn't even deal with things at the company. It wasn't until Amelia appeared in his dreams again that he discovered that Amelia already had a new husband and had formed a new family. The dream was so real that it almost made him collapse. Oliver immediately began a night-long search for Amelia's whereabouts. He realized that he had to go find her, even though their divorce papers had not yet been officially collected. And there was still a 30-day cooling-off period. Oliver felt uneasy. He was worried that if he did not contact her, the two of them might really miss each other. "As soon as I got off the plane, I saw my father waiting for me in the arrivals hall. My father didn't say much. He just took my suitcase. He patted me on the head and said, 'Let's go home.' Mom had prepared a table full of my favorite dishes. Even though I had been away from home for so long, they still clearly remembered what I liked to eat. After dinner, my mother asked me how long I planned to stay at home this time. I quietly hid in the shadows and wiped away the tears at the corners of my eyes. This time, I won't leave." Both my parents were momentarily stunned, but they both tacitly refrained from asking me anything else. My usually taciturn father was the first to speak this time. He said, "If you don't want to go, then don't go. Dad can still work, and there's no problem supporting you." I went back to the bedroom. I found that my mother had changed the bedding on the bed. I could still smell the scent of washing powder. My mother and I talked a lot. She didn't mention anything about Oliver and me. She just said, everyone should make their own decisions and not regret them. I burst into my mother's arms, crying and laughing. I told her about the abortion. At that moment, I felt like I had returned to my childhood, those carefree days. No matter what problems I encountered, my parents would always help me solve them. I never imagined that I would run into Oliver downstairs in the neighborhood one day. It wasn't so much a chance encounter as it was him deliberately looking for me. My mother and I had just returned from the market. We saw Oliver sitting downstairs in the neighborhood looking tired. He lit a cigarette, but he didn't smoke a single drag. He just stared at me blankly. It wasn't until the ashes burned his fingers that he came back to his senses. He stood up. He called my name timidly. "Amelia." I let go of my mother's hand. He actually remembered where we lived. That was quite an achievement. My mother smiled and patted me. After she went home, I took Oliver to the cafe near the housing estate. She said, "Let's talk. Solve the problem. I'll go home and cook dinner for you. It's a bit sunny today. I've just come back from the market. I feel warm, so I ordered a cold drink with ice." Oliver watched me drink 2 quick gulps. He immediately frowned. "Amelia, you're going to be a mother now. You're no longer the young girl you were when we got married." Something so cold. He didn't finish his sentence. He suddenly stopped. I was drinking the cold drink. I froze too, however, she quickly smiled easily. She said, "Being a mother is still a long way off. I'm still the child in the family. This drink with ice is just right." Oliver's hand suddenly trembled under the table. He clenched his lips. He didn't say another word. In the end, I broke the silence. "You came to see me on purpose this time. Is there something you want? I know you've been preparing for your wedding recently, but isn't there a 30-day cooling-off period for divorce? The time hasn't yet expired. You can't get a divorce certificate yet." Before Oliver could say anything, and covered his mouth before he could say anything. As expected, he kept his mouth open and didn't say a word for a long time. "Last time on the yacht. I shouldn't have pushed you into the sea. I apologize." Oliver thought for a long time this time, and then apologized to me when he spoke again. I froze for a moment, and then smiled indifferently. "This matter. I almost forgot if you didn't mention it." "No, I understand you. You can't forget." The man suddenly lost control and shouted. His eyes were wide. They were instantly filled with bloodshot veins, even if you could forget. I can't forget my own mistakes. I'm the one who messed up everything. I'm the one who ruined this family. I stared at him silently, without saying a word. Oliver suddenly sat down in his chair, weak and powerless. I then stood up. If there's nothing else, I'll go first. Oliver turned around, reluctantly asked me, Amelia, I know I was wrong. Let's go home. I walked out of the cafe without a second thought. That man was no longer worth a second glance. After that day, I started a new job. I became a teacher at an orphanage. Oliver always appeared in my life, whether he wanted to or not. Because of my job, I had to get up early every day. He would wait for me downstairs early in the morning. As soon as I left the house, he would hand me a prepared breakfast. And at noon, he would enthusiastically deliver lunch, just like I used to do for him every day. I didn't care about this, and I refused him many times. This man always found a way to appear in front of me. He said, Amelia, you used to take care of me. Now it's my turn to take care of you. I casually flipped through the food he had prepared. Smiling, I asked him, you like soy milk and fried dough sticks in the morning, and you always like to add a poached egg to your lunch. Do you know what I like to eat in the morning? Do you know what my favorite dish is? Oliver's legs gave way. He stuttered for a long time without saying anything. I had expected this outcome. I shoved the lunch box into his arms. Just say it. Admit it. You don't love me at all. You only have eyes for Sophia. You know what she likes and cares about, but you never cared about me. You don't even know what I like to eat or what I like to do. How can you say you love me? I was finished. Oliver immediately fled in a panic. I rarely saw him look so miserable. I couldn't help but wonder if I had gone too far. But this was the reality of our marriage after all these years. People are really strange. When the truth is revealed, they feel uneasy. They may even be afraid. After that day, I thought Oliver would leave me alone. But I underestimated his determination this time. I came home from work at the orphanage. My mother strangely pulled me aside and asked if I had gotten into trouble with Oliver again. Later, I found out. These days, Oliver is kneeling in front of the house every day, begging my mother to tell him all my likes and dislikes. My mother didn't want to deal with him. The neighbors who passed by started to gossip. Everyone spoke well of Oliver. Amelia, you should have a serious talk with Oliver. If this continues, it won't reflect well on our family. The next day, I had to call Oliver over to set the record straight. This was the first time I had contacted him after I had left. Oliver came over, with a smile on his face. Amelia, you wanted to see me, I said impatiently while scratching my head. Can you stop going to my house and disturbing my family? Your presence has seriously affected my life. Since we've decided to divorce, can you please disappear for good? Don't show up again. Oliver's smile quickly faded. His hands hung limp at his sides. He didn't say a word. I continued, go home. Sophia is waiting for you. She's waited for you for so long. Don't let her down. This time Oliver spoke. He stubbornly refused to leave. He kept pushing the lunchbox towards me. Amelia, look, I've figured out what you like to eat. I made this especially for you. Try it and see what you think. I swung my hand, knocking over his lunchbox. The food spilled onto the floor. A mess. You're pretending to be so affectionate now. It's useless. We're over. I signed the divorce papers on the day of our wedding. You didn't show up. Hiding in a hotel room with Sophia, saying you had no choice. Well, now, I've chosen for you. Regret slowly welled up in Oliver's eyes. He finally couldn't hold back any longer. He felt drained of all energy. He couldn't say a word. As I was about to turn around and go home, I heard him say, Amelia, I really regret it. If only I had understood earlier who I really loved. Unfortunately, this is now an irreversible fact. I walked quickly towards the elevator. Just as the door was about to close, I saw Oliver crouched on the floor. His face was full of pain. He was picking up the food that had fallen on the floor one after the other. He was eating and crying at the same time. Amelia, can't you forgive me? I cried my heart out, but it was too late to regret. In the following days, Oliver never showed up again. It wasn't until half a month later, the day I went to get my divorce papers, that I went back to see him. Compared to the last time, he looked even more haggard. His beard on his chin was in disarray. There was a bruise around the corner of his eye. His eyes were sunken. As soon as Oliver saw me, he immediately wanted to come over, but halfway through, he suddenly came to his senses. He had to greet me properly. I nodded calmly at him. Since he was already here, let's hurry up and get the divorce papers. Oliver stared at me blankly. Then he started looking around. He complained of a stomach ache. Then he said he was hungry and wanted to eat. It was only a short half-hour journey. He made it last until the civil registry office closed. I laughed out of anger. I simply told him. Oliver was secretly pleased, but when he heard this, he froze. Then he could only smile helplessly. The other person continued. If you don't want us to end up in a nasty situation, just go and get the divorce papers. Otherwise, I will go to court and force a divorce. He looked at me, his words stuck in his throat. Amelia, can't we just… I interrupted him. If you can bring our child back to life. Then of course. His last glimmer of hope was completely shattered. The next morning, I went to the civil affairs office early to wait for Oliver. When he arrived, he didn't look quite right, but I didn't care anymore. After getting the red divorce certificate, I immediately called home to tell the good news. I said to my mother, "Mom, I'm finally divorced. I've been freed." On the other end of the line, my father's voice came through. "It's good that you're divorced. I'll find you a suitable partner again." After chatting with my parents for a while, I finally hung up the phone. At that moment, Oliver, who had been standing behind me, seemed to say something. I didn't hear it clearly. When I turned to look at him, a smile appeared on his face. "Amelia, you must marry the boy you've been seeing. I'll go now." I interrupted Oliver directly. Without waiting for him to finish, I quickly left. After that day, I never saw him again. I went home and started planning to adopt a child from an orphanage. Every time I saw her, I felt that the unborn child seemed to be watching me from somewhere. The orphanage director was not old and quickly helped me with the adoption formalities. Lemon was abandoned because she was sick. I hope you can take good care of her in the future. Don't worry, director. Since I've decided to adopt Lemon, she'll be my child from now on. Just a few days after adopting Lemon, my father hurriedly arranged a blind date for me. I didn't want to go, but my parents kept pushing me. They said the other person didn't care about my status and didn't mind that I had adopted a child. He was neither rich nor a member of the elite. He was just like me. He also worked in an orphanage. When I first met him, I couldn't help smiling. He was the director of the orphanage where I had adopted Lemon. I asked him why he had chosen such an ordinary job. He smiled and answered, "Maybe because I was an orphan myself when I was young. I can understand how these children feel. My abilities are limited, but I want to do my best to help them. Sometimes attraction between people can be so sudden." I asked him if he wanted to raise Lemon Jr. with me. He naturally put a wedding ring on my finger. A year later, I became pregnant and went into labor in the hospital. I saw a familiar figure. I wasn't sure if it was Oliver, but just as I was giving birth, I heard the nurses chatting. They said that the man had been abusive. Later, when he got drunk, his wife couldn't take it anymore. She smashed him to death with a glass bottle. The man died. The woman went to prison. A family was broken up. I had nothing to say about it. In the following decades, I lived a comfortable and happy life.